Welcome to another episode of the Cool Tools Show and Tell. Our special guest this week is David Buxton. Hey, David, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan. My name's David. I am a tech entrepreneur based in London, England. I get energy from creating new things, and unfortunately, my carpentry is not all that. So I'm afraid it's the software consumers of this world who have to live with my output.
Well, it's a real delight to have you join us. I know you'll have some tools we don't know about, so that's always a real joy. So, David, what's one of your favorite tools these days?
So the first tool, which I'm going to just quickly share my screen so you can see, is one called Workflowy. Everyone has their favorite task management or sort of get things done type app, in my experience. I certainly went through about 20 of them before I finally settled on this, which I think is kind of the holy grail of personal information manager. That used to be a category back in the day of Lotus Notes. What it is basically is a single hierarchical kind of bullet point list, which you can filter and search and manipulate in order to merge together all the things you have to do in both your personal life and your sort of work life. And you can actually really bring everything together in one place. So I'm just showing at the moment the kind of the basic interface. You can see today that what I've got highlighted is the tasks that I've hashtagged with today, so it's things that I want to actually work on this day. One of them is to actually prepare for this podcast. So the cool thing that you have here is you've got the ability to actually drill into any bullet point and go as far down the rabbit hole as you want to. So I can click on an individual thing and I can see sort of a full document under there. I could carry on going and going and going, however far I wanted, but I can also zoom straight out to another level of visibility by just clicking on the shortcuts that I see down the left-hand side, which are basically like hashtags that represent kind of different categories, different classifications for my personal get things done methodology. And so I store everything in here from what I'm working on to things I need to work on for my business, through to things I need to talk about with my wife, through to like shopping lists that I want to keep, want to pick stuff up.
So it looks like this is a web-based app. Is that?
Yeah, it synchronizes excellently with my phone as well. So you can sort of, whenever someone tells me something, I just like dump it in, and I sort of sift through it periodically to make sure that I don't need to remember things. I find like one real source of anxiety is just trying to keep track of what I'm trying to keep track of.
Okay. Does it? But it does not have like a calendar interface, which many do. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of that?
You can tag things with date. I personally found that calendars that you tend to sort of like, what's the thing that Douglas Adams said? Like, I like deadlines. I like the whooshing sound they make as they go by. I sort of end up with all these tasks that I said I would do a week ago still in my rearview mirror. And I actually just personally found that unhelpful. So I think for people that are happy with their methodology, I don't know if there's a way of like convincing them to try something, and it might be actively harmful to try. But if you're like me and you still consider yourself to be like on that hunt for something that really sort of jives with your brain and helps you organize all of the different things that sort of pile into your life from different directions, work, personal, and keep them under control. I've just found this to be a weirdly successful product, really, really, really effective.
And the general structure of it seems to be like an outliner where you have a high level thing which you can open up or expand into all the subcategories, which you can then expand into the others. Is that the general architecture?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So down here on the left hand side, I've got 4 categories, which are the kind of like top level bullet points. And so I've got an inbox of things that that's where I write down new stuff that needs categorization. I've got projects, which are different things I'm working on, anything from like different startup ideas through to like looking for a nanny. I've got stuff that's from my personal life, and I've got like a kind of archive of stuff that I don't really think is super useful, but might be something I want to come back to. And then any of this stuff can be sort of expanded infinitely. There's all sorts of advanced features, like you can move things around from place to place. But I think the reason I love it is like, I always found with other interfaces that I was having to think about whether or not this should be in this system in the first place or not. Like I didn't have that kind of one ring to rule them all quality. And I've just found it super effective to have, the today tab, like stuff that's hashtagged for me to complete today, as the sort of like default on my home screen. And I've also found it really useful to have to manually change things and update them. So rather than it being like, I'm scheduling this for Tuesday and then it suddenly shows up in my Tuesday box, for me to actively have to go through and say, like, what are the things I want to finish today having completed? I think that's like a really useful active choice to make.
Right. And the things that you had that you were going to do today that you don't do, then you need to drag into the next day.
Well, sometimes I'm just like, oh, this isn't as big a priority as I think. So I just say, let's like do it tomorrow. And then the next morning, my process is to wake up, to go through all of the things that are tagged as either tomorrow or this week, or sometimes even next week. And to just like filter through those things and say, like, first of all, do those even need to be done? Secondly, maybe are those things that are as urgent as I think they are, etc. So I might sort of put them into an icebox, or I might say, actually, yeah, I'm gonna bite this off today.
And when you tag something, does that have any meaning? Is it just some text, or is it semantic?
It's just completely defined by me. I've just set this up as my own personal sort of hierarchy, but it's completely flexible and you can do whatever you want with that.
Right. So if you tag something today or tomorrow, it doesn't register. It doesn't know that it's today or tomorrow.
No, you can say, for example, if you said, what's today's date? You could say 20 September, just typing in 20 September, and it interprets that as a date. And then it will actually like give a sort of calendar-like quality to that. Mm-hmm. I think someone was thinking about introducing, they've got various things like Kanban as well in here. I think people have asked them for calendars, but like, honestly, I think that they should just like carry on keeping it simple. I've personally always found like calendars just make it more confusing rather than more helpful. But it's, everyone's got to make their own individual choices about this stuff.
And I know that there have been many to-do apps over time. And how does this compare? I mean, it seems superficially, because I haven't used them, similar to other to-do apps.
I think it's super, super similar to lots of things. The ones that's most similar to my mind that are like explicitly to-do apps are things like, I think, is it Omnigraphal or something? There's sort of quite complicated like outliner type and to-do type apps. I've either found always that the mobile app isn't good enough or simple enough for me to like just get it out whenever someone mentions a podcast or mentions a resource I should read or a person I should look at hiring or speak to or something. Or it's just too complicated for me to actually understand how I'd apply it for real life. Sure. So I've just been really satisfied with the usability of this. Right. And yeah, it's the only thing that's stuck. I mean, right. There's nothing else I would use, much less recommend to an audience of other people.
So let's say a hypothetical, someone mentions a book that they recommend that you read. Yeah. How would you go about it in your system? What would you do? You open up your phone and then what?
So I would I'd open up, normally it's my phone, but I might go to my inbox and then I would say, here's, great book from Kevin.
Just add it at the top of your inbox.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
I might tag it if it was urgent and I needed to look at it. I might say, today. And then that will then show up as my sort of default browser tab. When I open a new tab, this is set to be my the today view is set to be my default view to keep me focused.
So you put a tag on it today, which you can then sort for via the tags today. But if it wasn't today, would you put another tag on it? Like,
normally not. Normally I just go through my inbox. Like, in fact, as you could see from just there, I had a lot of irrelevant stuff in there that I haven't sort of sifted through yet. But I think that, if you follow one of these get things done methodologies, I'm by no means the sort of best evangelist for them. I'm kind of lazy like most of us, but I do one of the sort of key things is to dump stuff into a place that gets sort of periodically sifted through, rather than sort of make assignments a priority immediately when you have new stuff come in.
All right. And so just following through your own system and using this, let's say you have your inbox and it says a great book that you have been recommended, then you either need to act on it then, or then you file it away somewhere if you have a later.
Normally what I would actually do is I would like go through that sort of inbox thing, and then rather than saying great book today, I would say like, buy great book from Amazon or whatever. So,
Right, right,
part of the art, I think, of making any sort of like GTD type system, get things done type system, is actually taking, sometimes like kind of inchoate, fragments, and turning them into something closer to easily digestible or like relatively mechanical activities. Like, it's one thing to like, there's a book, great, but like, what do I want to do? Do I want to buy it from Amazon? Do I want to read it? Do I want to like flick through the first chapter and decide whether, so just trying to like kind of focus on what you're trying to get out of each of these sort of pieces of information. But that kind of starts to get into, how you use the tool rather than, what is it? But yeah, I think it's a great tool for that stuff, in my opinion.
And then going back then to this is a web based, but is the on your phone? Is it actually dedicated app?
Yeah, it's a dedicated app. It syncs like really amazingly with your with the online version. So I will try and pull up. I've just literally opened the app, and you might not be able to see.
You're
Like,
showing your phone.
I'm showing my screen,
Yeah.
and it's got a mirror of exactly that. So without me having to do anything or manually synchronize, or like, how you sometimes like are pulling down on your phone to see if you can like get the most recent version. So it feels like it's always there, which
Right.
I think is what something like that has to be.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit like notes, but a little bit more structured than notes.
I find with notes, the problem is like just you have to decide what level of hierarchy you're working at. And I
Right.
always get kind of caught up in like almost that sort of process of like, oh, should this be a heading, or should this be formatted? Or like, maybe I want to write this as a long form paragraph, right? Whereas this is just like everything's a bullet point and you really don't have any choice. So you better like just focus on the content rather than like worry about how you're formatting stuff.
Okay, good enough. Thank you for that. Workflowy. And is it I assume it's for both Android and iPhone?
It's definitely for iPhone. I actually don't know about Android. I should have checked beforehand.
Okay.
But definitely for iPhone. Great iPhone app.
And do you recall what it costs? Is it
It's $50 a year, and like I am super skinflint in general. I really, really resent paying for most apps, I would say. And I pay that with so much happiness. It's one of the very few that you really that's the real measure, is like the level of happiness that you have when you get asked to renew your credit card details or whatever.
yes, that's a really good good criteria. So okay, so Workflowy, that's a really great one. So David, what's another cool tool of yours?
So my next cool tool is one of our many bicycles, one of our many e-bikes. E-bikes are obviously a massively growing category, but what we have is we live in relatively central, but not like right in the middle of London. We don't own a car. We've got two little kids, one's 4, one's 6. Like, they can actually ride bikes, but we get everywhere using a combination of their bikes and an electric cargo bike. And the specific kind we actually have a couple, but one of them is a Tern GSD, which is, I don't know what it stands for. I'm not sure if it's get shit done, but it might well be. It certainly feels that way. And basically what it is it's a normal bike. It's actually exactly as long as a normal like road, sort of road bike, 185-ish centimeters, I think, if memory serves, from sort of like wheel tip to wheel tip. And it, rather than being one of those bucket bikes where you have a sort of big like trough on the front, big bucket on the front, it's a long tail one, which basically has a sort of long bench rear carrier thing, and it has loads of different accessories that admittedly cost a lot of money that you can buy to basically seat children from like 0 through to about well, I guess if you just had one of them, you could probably get like an adult, well, easily get an adult on the back, but through, you could probably get 2 children of 8 on the back, I would say. And certainly for us, we just find this is the most remarkable innovation, because it means that we can make a journey that, in very good traffic would be 15 minutes into an 8-minute bike ride. We don't have the hassle of owning a car. My wife actually doesn't drive. And we, get to be outdoors and, but efficient. And I guess, although this isn't our primary motivation, like somewhat green. So Yeah, this specific model that I've given, this Tern, is just one of the many ones out there. There's models by Rad Power. There's an Italian company called Bici Capace. Tons of them that make them. But if you've got little kids and you live somewhere that's like relatively bikeable, and you have somewhere where you think it won't instantly get stolen, that you can store this thing, like I think you should definitely buy one if you can afford it.
Right.
They are expensive though, several $1,000s at least.
Sure. What about the weight? I mean, that's one of the issues with big cargo bikes, especially e-versions, which is that you're not going to really lift them very easily. Like if you have to go upstairs, or I mean, you have to be able to store this at ground level, right?
1,000%. I mean, I'm 6'4" and 220 pounds, and like I cannot physically lift the whole thing off the ground except in like an actual emergency. So it's we have a place we can store it, sort of street level. It is possible to buy really good locks. It is possible to buy really good insurance, but they're valuable things. And so if you don't have somewhere that's like at least relatively protected, then you want to think twice before like exposing yourself to like day-to-day stress of just like walking out the door and it not being there. That said, in our neighborhood, like it's regularly the case that you have car thieves that go around and they'll like just go through your car and find anything and just like they don't even steal it anymore. They just like steal the stuff in it. So unfortunately, even cars don't make you totally safe from that. So here's a kind of here's what it looks like. It's a yellow bike with this one in the picture here. Got a long tail. You can attach a sort of kiddie bike seat or two kiddie bike seats to the back. You can also put front panniers on it. You can put a front basket on it. You can adjust both the stem and the seat to suit different riders. So it's really easy for both me and my wife, who's like a foot shorter than me, to ride it without like messing around too much.
It's a step through, so easy to get on.
It's step through, so easy to get on. The battery, I mean, you can get, depending on how far you ride, obviously, you can get certainly a couple of days or a week of riding out of it. It just charges from a normal wall outlet. They're great. They're great things, we see more and more and more of them here in London, and I suspect the same is true of many of your listeners elsewhere in the world. But it's a fun thing to buy.
Yeah, and just if we can, do you happen to know what the actual price is? You say several thousands. Was it like
so I looked up the price in from a shop in New York, and here's a kind of random New York retailer. They go for anything between about this GSD S10 I've got listed on this website for between $5,000 and $5,500. They have more expensive models that go all the way up to like $10,000, but for that you're buying like a lot of random gubbins that you may or may not need. But what I would say as well is you probably do need to spend another, let's call it $1,000 on the various sort of things that you would need to sort of securely attach children, depending on how old they are. So they have various sort of pads and accessories and things like that. It's a bit painful once you get into the whole sort of accessory buying thing. There are cheap ones. The cheapest one that I think is renowned to be good quality is the Rad Power, the Rad Wagon or something, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And that is a meaningfully cheaper thing. So here it's £1,300, so whatever, $1,800, $1,600, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So they said that the Tern was a folding bike.
No, so Tern is I think a Taiwanese company that makes a variety of relatively high-end bikes. So they make some non-electric folding ones. They also might even make an electric folding one, but the specific models that I'm talking about, the stem does fold, so you can actually you can sort of make it a bit smaller. But I actually think that's kind of a useless feature because like the real problem is it's super heavy. So it doesn't matter how small it is. Like you still can't drag it up your stairs to your apartment. I mean, not unless you're He-Man. Yeah.
Okay.
The other one is Rad Power Wagon, which is a bit of a simpler thing and a bit lower, maybe a bit lower quality in some cases. But honestly, pay some money, takes choice.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a great suggestion. I mean, I think your dual source suggestion is a electric cargo bike of some sort as an alternative to a car.
I mean, for sure.
Yeah. So, David, what's what's one of your third choices in for a cool tool?
So my third choice is super geeky. So we can either, not go down this rabbit hole, or we can. But I've been working a lot with generative AI recently, and
Okay.
so my third tool suggestion is a I guess you would call it like an AI wrapper. So it's a library, a Python library called Langchain. It has a JavaScript version as well, so sort of a parallel JavaScript implementation. And really, what it's designed to do is to serve as a abstraction layer, to make it easy to create applications or tools that use generative AI. APIs from companies like OpenAI, which is probably the best known with ChatGPT. Microsoft, who also sell basically a version of ChatGPT through Azure. Google has Bard, and there's like a ton of open source models, right? They're the sort of things that like generate text for you, write you an acrostic about cool tools or something, right? And so the reason I'm recommending it is because I think there's probably a lot of people who are really curious about this area, but sort of don't know where to get started. I think you do need a little bit of programming, maybe like computer IT comfort rather than necessarily like programming ability, because increasingly you can do a lot of this sort of almost like engineering in the natural language of the prompts themselves, right? But in order to consume the prompts programmatically, in order to sort of interface with the APIs as opposed to typing stuff into ChatGPT, you've got to write code on some level, and Langchain gives you pretty good, convenient abstractions for you to actually write kind of powerful things without doing a ton of unnecessary legwork. So it both enables you to really easily talk to the APIs themselves. That's not super difficult, but it also gives you a lot of stuff around the edges that allow you to do things that you'll almost certainly want to do as part of building a real tool. So for example, it gives you stuff to extract information from PDF files, right? So, if you want to build something which reads PDFs in a directory and answers questions on them using ChatGPT, you're going to need to like suck information out. And a lot of people, when they're trying to build something for real, what happens is they get stuck on like, oh god, it's actually like a huge pain to suck all this, how do I parse this PDF format kind of thing. And so I found it, we found it really useful for that. And I think their documentation is really excellent. It gives tons of examples which you can copy and paste. So basically, if you can get a working Python environment up on your machine, or JavaScript, I think you should be able to experiment with something that actually like does something real. And I think that's super fun, because ultimately this is one of the sort of bedrock foundational tools I think that we're going to be using for the coming decades.
So there are a lot of programming tools that aren't just giving you, I mean, this is a tool that gives you access to AI, but there's a lot of tools that use AI, like Copilot, to help you program. So does this tool also employ AI to assist you in doing the scripting?
No, it's a great question. It's more of a layer on top of doing that. So the way I would look at it is more like these are some recipes. It's more like a cookbook, and some handy utensils, shall we say, for yourself, like creating some, they can be as basic or as complicated as you want, tools of your own. And so I think it's the people who I think should, set aside a weekend or, a PTO day or something to playing with this are people who, sort of they've kind of played with the ChatGPT web interface. They sort of see that you can get it to adopt different personalities and to reframe information and to summarize things that you copy and paste in, or to like, they've played with prompts and they sort of understand there's like a lot of interesting things out there. But what they really want to do is they want to chain together. I mean, I think that's really partly where the chain comes from, right? They want to chain together different prompts in order to, for instance, like one prompt might be in charge of doing one thing. You might say, I want you to read these Google search results and tell me like which one is the best, for instance. And then you might have another prompt which says, I want you to read this web page and summarize it, right? And so what you want to do in order to, to provide an answer to a question rather than a web query in a very naive way, right? You might say, cool, let's like run those two things in sequence. Let's get the AI model to pick the right web result, and then let's like summarize that web result and give me the answer. So that's a super basic example, but it's something that you can't easily achieve. I mean, there are these
Right.
things in ChatGPT called plugins, but like basically, if you want to do complex workflows or moderately complex workflows,
Yeah.
like you got to do it that way.
Right. I think every one of the I have a friend who's a doctor who's had a website for 30 years, people asking him questions and him giving answers. If he wanted to make an AI version of that, of ask me anything, basically, taking all that content and feeding it in and training in some senses, or refining, maybe it's the word they use. That would this tool, Langchain, would be ideal for trying to set that up.
I think it would be a great place, certainly, to prototype it, right? To sort of work out, is there something there? Like, can you deliver a kind of acceptable user experience? And you can carry on building applications all the way through to production, right? For my current project, I'm using that all the way through to like, you know, an end user experience in a kind of B2B SaaS, right? A business to business tool, right? But you know, all of these companies, they all have APIs, and it can become just like completely overwhelming. And so I think what this allows you to do is just push down enough of the implementation details and the differences between the different systems that you could be using, to sort of like convince yourself that this is an area that's worth making an investment in. And so that, I think, is a gateway drug, kind of, basically.
Yeah. One could kind of imagine maybe in a year now is people would have a commercially customized consumer app doing this.
There are attempts there. I will. There's one that I've seen that I've momentarily forgotten what's called, but I'll see if I can find it so you can put it in the show notes. That's like a hosted version of this. The ecosystem is still quite immature. I mean, like ChatGPT only came out, I think, November last year. You know, so even though there's a lot of hype around it, it takes time for people to build products which are sufficiently robust to go to end users. And so to the extent that we're still waiting for, like, you know, consumer friendly versions of this sort of thing, I think this is the closest to that I can imagine. So if you're like a product manager and you can just about like copy and paste some Python code and get it running, I think that's the level of skill you need in order to get like really useful results out of this. But you definitely, if you don't even know what Python is, then yeah, not your thing.
Okay. That's fair warning. Okay. So, so David, in your toolbox, what's your fourth pick for us today?
So my fourth tool is, I often joke that this is the item that after I saved my children from a house fire, I would like run back into the house.
Okay, that's a great. That's my
wife can make her own way out, right? For the record, it's what's called a line a day diary, and I'm holding it up.
A line a day, you say?
A line a day diary.
It's line a day diary. Okay.
It's an A5 or similar, anyway. Yeah. A book, and the thing that's special about it, this one is made by Leuchtturm. I don't know how you pronounce it. So it's like a moleskin type form factor, right? It's the thing that's special about it is that inside the pages are printed with sort of, it's difficult to see because I've written on so much of it, but they're printed kind of with sort of 5 years basically for each page. And so each page corresponds to one calendar day. So page 1 is January the 1st and the last page is December 31st in the diary, if you go from the front to the back of the diary. But each page has on it 5 different years. And basically, as what you do is every day you write a small entry in your journal. And then at the end of the year, you turn back to the beginning and you start filling in the next line. And as those of you who had access to the thing could see, I mean, I've now been writing this for 4 years. And I've written an entry on almost every single day. And I think there's 2 amazing things about the form factor. One is just like, journaling in a really confined space means that you're just way more likely to actually do it, in my experience anyway. Maybe there's people who are writing A4 sheets every single day, but I don't know them. And
you're only required to write, you say 1 line, so to just 1 sentence is sort of the minimum, and you probably write 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I would say normally I probably actually write more than more than I wanted to, and maybe more than I started off writing. I maybe write 100 words a day, right? So that's my kind of like daily routine just before I go to bed. So I love that form factor of being forced to sort of condense things, almost like forced to put it into a tweet. I mean,
Right.
all the tweets are getting bigger and bigger these days, so who knows what we're ending up with there. And then the other thing, which is really remarkable, is because you're seeing above your current entry, the previous year's entry, you get this like very emotional and very like richly textured sort of understanding of time that like I think there's very few things in our lives that make us do this, right? And so I was just looking at this to make sure there wasn't anything particularly compromising on this page, just in case someone sort of like goes through it, and applies CIA and image analysis to it. And 2 years ago was like the day I quit my previous job after I sold my previous company, and that it doesn't have any emotional connection except to me, but it's the sort of thing I would like never ever think about probably again.
Right.
If I wasn't doing this, and I think it's a really great therapeutic activity. Well, therapeutic is maybe too strong a word, but I think it's a very meaningful activity for me, and I think it helps me with what you might, if you were being very pretentious, call like a gratitude practice,
Sure.
as well as just like general reflection.
Right. When you were writing after 4 years, say if you have a couple of years ahead of you, and you're writing, are you writing sometimes in response to what you're reading from the previous years, or do you kind of try and write first and then look at what you've written before?
I think every person has to like find their own journey. I often just write like for today, but there's two sort of different interaction modalities, right? One is when you're kind of writing and you're responding more like reading around it. And sometimes you just like flick through and you're just like, reading old entries and seeing also like when you have young kids, like each year is like very different from the last, but in ways that you never really you weren't paying attention to at the time. So, I mean, I think this is something that anyone would get value from or would get pleasure from. But I think particularly when you have young children,
Right.
The moments are almost impossible to capture, and you sort of try to take as many photos as you can. But
Yeah.
for some reason, we just all have too many photos in our lives.
Right.
This is the best, yeah.
It'd be interesting to see what kind of effect it has when you have to turn over to a new book after 5 years.
I'm kind of terrified about it, although I will be. I wouldn't say I'm like a massive completionist type person, but I'm quite looking forward to like actually getting to the end of this book. I tried to. I got halfway through creating a sort of electronic version of this, and for various reasons, I never like properly put it live. But I think one thing about the physical world, which I think is so great, and I think this show, Cool Tools, really, I think helps us all reflect on periodically, is how I do think there's a special place for physical objects in shaping our understanding of time and of space, and like rather than forcing everything to conform to being on a 4.9-inch OLED screen, to sort of to let something else like create your kind of conceptual framework.
Right.
Is quite it's good.
And you could certainly these days digitize it if your handwriting is at all legible, which, by the way, my problem is I literally cannot read my own handwriting the next day. It's degraded to such an extent that it is illegible to me, myself, the next day.
I mean, my daughter is 6 and her handwriting is meaningfully better than mine. Yeah, I think I do live in fear. I mean, as I said, it's like one of the few things I would really like try to save. I live in fear when I'm traveling. I take it with me. I live in fear I'm going to leave it on a train or something. I mean, I've written in the front, like, send it back to me. I'll give you £100, like no questions asked, kind of thing. So I've done what I can to try and protect it against that sort of risk. But
yeah.
I worry about losing it. It would be a
you certainly should scan it and have it backed up.
For sure.
And OCR, these days is pretty good. You could train it on very bad handwriting.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. The level, the state of the art in these areas has really
Yeah,
improved so much. Yeah,
right.
with the AI revolution.
Well, this has been it's a great suggestion. So there may be more than one version of these kinds of books, 5-year diaries and etc.
You can find like a million of them on
Yeah,
Amazon. If you Google line a day diary, or if you search on Amazon for line a day diary, I really like this Lectern one because I love having a proper size book. So as I say, a kind of A5 form factor, as
right.
opposed to a lot of them are that kind of slightly sort of skinnier one that's almost like an address book type.
Yeah,
I don't know what the right thing is. Kind of
right.
they're like vertically narrower. And I find that while that might be truly one line a day, like I actually find that's just like too small for
Right.
me. It's like uncomfortable for my hand to like write on. I don't take pleasure in the writing when it's that
Right.
small.
I think they're also sometimes called 5-year diaries as well. Just
Maybe, yeah, that's probably true. Um, yes, uh, yeah. Anyway, I'd really encourage people to do that.
yeah. So David, we have a few minutes. Can you share with us anything that you are working on or that you want to share with our audience? Do you have anything to add?
I guess my most interesting current project is that after selling my previous company, I am starting work on a new startup. So I'm working on a project called Harriet. And what we're trying to create is an AI powered HR assistant that takes away all of the drudgery from your team and basically abstracts away all of the kind of constellation of different HR systems that live in the background and make many employees' lives, quite burdensome and boring. So our thesis is that one of the consequences of AI is that in the future, not just Goldman Sachs corner office bankers, right, but everyone will have an assistant that helps them do all of the administrative
Right.
tasks that are necessary for the company to carry on running, but like not actually helpful to any employee or to any customer of the company. So goodbye to expenses and pay slips and holiday booking and knowledge management. All that stuff I think is going to get subsumed into what we think into a personality that is it's able to work out what someone wants and to connect them to the right data source and the right information that they need to actually kind of just like get on with their lives. So that's really fun. We're working with the Langchain tool that I showed. That was kind of how I got hooked. So I thought it was worth sharing that as a gateway drug. I just think there's tons and tons of opportunity in this space, but the models are not omnipotent and they're not omniscient. And so there's a lot of fun problems to solve there as well when you're trying to build like real end user interactions and create a great user experience. So I thought I'd tell the audience about that because I think that those challenges are probably pretty common to people who are working in similar areas. Whether or not you started off as an AI company, I think everyone's going to have to be an AI company in the next 5-10 years, kind of thing.
Yeah, that was been long. My prediction was take X and add AI, and that's your future business.
I think it's going to be interesting. And what we're trying to do is a little bit different, right? We're trying to say, well, actually, if you just added AI, people would still be confused, like where their payslip lived, right? Because they only need it once a quarter or whatever when they buy a house or, different situations. So as much as anything, what you're going to need is you're going to need someone who like helps you navigate all those different resources because most companies are not terribly well organized. They kind of accrete different systems over time, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I look forward to it. That'd be really great. I think we'll have. The question is going to be whether we're going to have one assistant who's really, really good, or we have to manage 10 different assistants. And that's, I think nobody can answer that question right now. It's sort of like, how many apps do you want on your phone, or even for how many phones do you want, right? Or how many devices do you want in your pocket? Do you want just one, or do you want multiple ones? We don't know the answer right now.
Well, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head because one of the biggest challenges for AI is trying to the models are so powerful that it's very difficult from an end user point of view to work out like what I should be doing with them. There's almost like a choice paralysis thing of like, right, you can give me like dating advice and you can educate me on nuclear physics, and you can also like tell me, information about, I don't know, the Mariana Trench or something. Like, what should I use you for? And so I think what we're trying to do with Harriet, which is the project I'm working on, is find a way of sort of grouping together enough coherent skills and enough coherent activities in one place that end users can have an intuitive understanding of what the tool is and is not capable of. And I'm sure there will be other things in different areas that do similar things, but there's a big user experience in the broadest sense of the phrase challenge there to make it sort of legible.
I don't think it's impossible to imagine that you have the Uber assistant who deals with Harriet and Tony and Roger, and they come back and said, "Well, Harriet says this," and so.
I mean, I think that's a extremely astute point, and I think that it's hard to predict exactly like where we're going to end up. But I think from a end user experience point of view, we believe that there's a very big chance that you as an employee will not be forced to spend half of your like new employee induction on how to book a holiday kind of thing, and then which you instantly forget, by the way. So
and I think just thinking, speculating here, taking a moment of fantasy, I think one of the things we're going to come down to is who owns your assistant, or who basically who does your assistant work for? And so like the company could be offering the HR assistant to all employees that would but maybe you actually want to have your own assistant deal with that. And so there's going to be a little bit of a conflict or a tussle between, it's just like when you're writing your journal, it's like you could probably find somewhere that's hosted. It's like Twitter is kind of the version of it, but Twitter kind of controls.
Yeah,
and they could take it away, and so you kind of you want to really control that. And so this locus of who owns the agent, I think, is going to be a bit of. I think there'll be a little tussle about that in the future.
Super interesting. I actually hadn't really thought about it that term, but that's definitely a situation in which I can imagine, yours kind of outcome happening, where it's like, well, actually, Nick here, who's my assistant, is going to deal with like the company's, sort of back-end systems, and obviously the integrations between like whatever different payroll systems and stuff. Like only Harriet plugged into those things, but Nick can just use her as a gateway to like get into all those different things and manage my whatever benefits or whatever I want to do, those sorts of things that are more focused on me. So yeah, really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it from that angle, but there's definitely going to be the ecosystem is very interesting to speculate about.
Right. And it'll be coming down kind of to the incentives, right? I mean, who owns the incentives, or who directs the incentives for your assistant? Who does your assistant work for? I think that's kind of going to be kind of a something people pay attention to in the future.
Yeah, really interesting. Well,
so anyway, I'm just enjoying this bit of speculation. So I don't know the answers, but it sounds like you're way ahead of the rest of us in thinking about assistance, and I look forward. I hope wish you great success.
Thank you very much. It's an extremely interesting area to be exploring. And I think the right way of exploring it right now is to explore it through the prism of commercial application, because otherwise it can be extremely difficult to know which way is up. I did go through a period of relatively deep depression where I just thought that it was pointless to do anything commercially because anything could be instantly copied. And
Yeah.
then I started playing more and more with the tools, and I realized that there's enough complexity there that the sort of AGI, or even the kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
basic questions of defensibility and kind of value proposition are still, I think, as important as ever. Maybe
Yeah.
even more important because it's less familiar territory for most buyers
Yeah. Yeah.
in this market.
I think AI in general will become a commodity, but there'll be many, many species of them, and I think the interface is going to be the place where there'll be value added and moats. It's having, and the interface for me, part of that is ownership is part of the interface, and so I think. I think it's all going to come down to having all these, the broadest sense of interface of how you interact with it, even though behind the engine of it, it's like electricity is, it's common, but the motors and the design, the front of it, the buttons, the design, those are all things that there's plenty of room for uniqueness, value, proprietary, and love. People love it. So I think in the end there may only be a few engines that are generating that, but that still leaves huge areas of potential branding, potential excellence. So yeah, I'm not worried about that.
I think it's an amazing area to be playing. I think also, just from a practical point of view, one of the cool things about this potential platform shift, right, from like GUIs, like graphical user interfaces, which we've spent since like Windows 95 basically like building, right, to kind of what I heard Stephen Wolfram on something not so long ago called LUIs, like linguistic user interfaces, sort of like broadly chat interfaces, but not necessarily.
I call them conversational interfaces, but go ahead.
Yeah. So this shift has two consequences, like one of which is good and one of which is still unknown. The one that's good is like you can now move much faster because it actually did just take a long time to build graphical user interfaces, and like testing them is a huge pain, and then anticipating users' needs is a huge pain. And everyone's seen these enterprise systems where it's like the only feature that anyone uses is like 5 submenus deep, a thing saying beware of the tiger, right? So that's one problem. And then the thing that's like still unknown whether or not it's going to be any good is like, do consumers actually, or do users really want to use linguistic interfaces, like conversational interfaces? Can they get their heads around them? Or would they just prefer to be kind of funneled into a series of like well thought through default actions, which is what graphical user interfaces do quite successfully, right?
Right.
I think the jury's still out, honestly.
That's interesting because, we don't realize it, but there's actually some educational aspect of the graphical user interface. In other words, you have to kind of learn about files and menus and drop downs and dialog boxes. It's not quite intuitive, but it's close. But you still have to be kind of trained to expect that, you're looking for these little arrows and they indicate that there's more there. And so there's a bunch of conventions of it. I think there's a whole bunch of conventions that we need to learn for the conversational user interface. Like how to ask what's available. I mean, that's one of the problems with like Siri or Alexa, which is not conversational. It's just speech recognition, is you have no idea what it can do. You don't know, like, what are the options that are actually available? There's no equivalent of a drop-down menu. But we can invent some of those things in a kind of a conversational user interface. You can say, what are my options? And then they can say them. And then you can say, there may have to be some way of repeating them, or, tell me more about the third one. And then you can we need to invent things and educate people to develop the conversational user interface, which we don't have. I think conversation is a very fundamental human way of interacting, but we need to develop those gestures, those conventions, those protocols that people can expect and be trained on. So I think this is not an instantaneous thing. It's going to require training us as well as training the AIs.
Well, I think what we'll probably see is something quite similar to the kind of, the trend away from, is it correctly pronounced, like skeuomorphism?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like the quality of user interfaces as having been designed to mimic real world objects. Right. So, your diary app has like tabs in it. It looks like it's got a ring binder, right? Those sorts of things, which like Apple started off with some of those.
Right,
with the first
I know. Yeah.
And a lot of them have they sort of evaporated, for want of a better word, over time in terms of the designs. They've become more and more abstract, right? We've become more and more familiar and less in need of like the representational cues that help us realize what something's for. The way we're thinking about that from a conversational point of view is that we think the right sort of almost like quasi-skeuomorphic place to start from is like a personality, because if we say like, right, you have an image of someone who is in charge of HR operations in a company, and like probably if you asked like 10 people to write down what do you think that person does, you'd probably end up with like some reasonable degree of overlap, right? And so you've got to kind of start from the point of view of like, I'm taking a personality and trying to like almost like build in the skills that personality has access to. Because otherwise, I think, yes, it's important that interfaces can list their capabilities. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to be like, right, there are 4,000 capabilities. One, and you're like, okay, well, this is this is gonna get boring really quickly, Or if you're like in an IVR menu, it's like for HR capabilities, press 1, So it needs to be kind of both finite and like immediately recognizable, and kind of communicate to the user clearly. And we think that the best place to start is trying to sort of like springboard off a like an existing job description, basically, of like a real human being. But we might be right, we might be wrong. I think it's the market is extremely not unified on how this question, or whether this question will be satisfactorily addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a good point that we will probably in the beginning model the conversations with our AI assistants on a kind of either a phone tree existing model, which doesn't really work, or even a human conversation, which may not work in the end. We may have to develop a unique kind of conversation to have with AIs. In other words, you're being trained in a certain way. There's a certain interface, there's a certain protocol, there's certain conventions that we will develop that people will understand over in 10 years from now, that this is sort of what you do to work with them. That's sort of that's the convention. It's kind of like we talk to pets and dogs and cats a little differently than we talk to humans. That's the conversational interface we have with a pet. Well, we'll probably have a slightly different one for dealing with the AIs.
I'm reminded of my father, who had an extremely badly trained Labrador, who mainly the training involved my dad like not wanting to talk to the Labrador in the sort of like simple approved vocabulary that the trainers preferred. But I definitely think that's possible. Our ambition is to be able to provide a human-like or sort of as close to a human level of interaction as possible. Certainly what we found in user research is that if humans try to do something and the AI just like wildly misunderstands them, that can really limit their willingness to sort of like try again. People don't have a ton of patience with this stuff. And so I do think that, either you've got to be really explicit that the human's the one who's got to adapt, or you've got to get really, really close to like verisimilitude, I think.
I mean, it's an open question about whether the current version of the GUI interface on a computer, drop-down menu, files, folders, is that a human way of doing it? Yes. No, it's sort of like...
Well, you don't normally have a hierarchical folder system in your filing cabinet, do you? You normally have like a flat one, right?
So there's it's like it's as human as we can make it, maybe I would say, but So I expect the AI kind of be the same thing, that it's not going to be exactly like talking to a person, but it'll be resembling that and entirely different than interacting with the GUI interface on a laptop.
Well, the one thing that's really nice is that it's so much quicker to build stuff when you don't need to, you can prototype and build in, minutes rather than.
Yeah.
It's really
Well,
cool.
anyway, sounds like fun. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your cool tool suggestions.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you also for your insight in terms of conversation and especially ownership, which aren't things that I've sufficiently thought about before.
Well, great. Okay. This year, our Cool Tools blog will be 20 years old, which means we've been posting something new every day for 20 years. It's only possible because of the very engaged and knowledgeable readers and listeners like yourself. You've kept this place going, and we are very grateful for you. With this idea of 20 years in mind, we decided to try an experiment this year, and I'm inviting our guests and listeners to join me on our Cool Tool Show and Tell, which is the program that you're listening to right now. So if you feel you'd make a good guest on this podcast and have 4 uncommon tools that you'd like to share with us, please sign up on our form on the website, and we'll see about inviting you. You must be comfortable talking on a video, and you need to have some tools that you can show. We record on, as you know, on Zoom. We do a YouTube version, a video version of it, as well as an audible version. Fill out the form if you're interested, and list your 4 cool tools, and we'll see if there's a good fit. The applications aren't guaranteed in any way, and we're looking at tools that are new to us and appropriate tools, and whether the times will work for you. So we're really interested in hearing from people all over the world, not just in the US, although the tools have to be available online, easily available online. And if you are a longtime listener, you kind of know what the definition of our tools are. They're very broad. They can be anything that's handy, from something in the kitchen to something you use to travel, to a workshop, to something professional that we may not know about. We're really interested in things that we don't know anything about. So this is an open invitation. We'll give it a try. If you think you make a good guest for this podcast, fill out the form. There'll be a link somewhere on our website. And we look forward to chatting with you. Thank you.